plan is Street Fighter 6 open beta and Bram Stoker Dracula. It's gonna be live.
The wisdom of books, and the excitement of video games. Zen Theater Lit After Dark illuminates the path to enlightenment and fosters a sense of unity among its audience. Through this unique fusion of storytelling and interactive experiences, we aim to nurture personal growth, improve learning, and inspire a peaceful existence. Guided by your obedient servant, Sebastian Saint Serapian Smalls, we embark on a journey of self-discovery. But where do we begin? Begin by simply listening, slow down, see just how peaceful today can be. Together, we shall create a harmonious community, bound by shared passions and a desire to elevate the human experience. Sebastian Saint Serapian Smalls will be there, to the end of the line, my Valentine, guiding you on this journey towards a more serene and enlightened tomorrow. Catch you guys on the flip side.
Begin by simply listening, slow down, see yourself peaceful.
BetterHelp is great because I have a very busy schedule.
Get therapy wherever you are.
Begin by simply listening, slow down, see yourself peaceful today can be. Thanks so much for swinging by. It is I, your obedient servant, Sebastian St. Smalls. The plan for this one is Street Fighter 6 open beta, which is a bigger deal than the demo in some ways because it's multiplayer against real people and more characters. For me, that means Chun-Li and Jury. And Dracula, read by that Christina Wainwright library lady. So I haven't even tried to open this yet, so it's kind of an experimental one. And I didn't check to see if you can hear me. Can you hear anything I said? I go down to a microphone. Testing, testing, testing. Testing, testing. That's not encouraging. One more test. Okay, I can at least understand it, so that's good enough for me. Oh, and then some cute music over here, so it sounds less dead. That's just a magic trick I have. Okay. I'm just nervous to see what happens when I open the game, basically. But I'm gonna brave it, because that's what we're here for, right? Begin by simply listening. Slow down. See just how peaceful today can be, comma. Greetings, children, comma. It is I, comma. Your obedient servant, Sebastian St. Smalls, comma. You're killing me, Smalls, comma. Vincent twice, comma. AKA Bennett. Period. The plan for this one is Street Fighter 6 open beta, meaning multiplayer with real people and more characters, including Chun-Li and Yuri. And Street Fighter 6. Dracula, comma, read by the San Diego Library, comma. So we're gonna go over here. Was live comment.
You guys, what tea is the Earl Grey de la Creme, which is getting Dracula. All right. Today's tea is the Earl Grey de la Creme, which is getting really close to the end of my little bag, so I'm excited to try. It's always fun to get to finish up a tea that you've enjoyed, and I'm gonna have to make the big decision: do we get more of the same tea because I really like it, or do we get a brand new tea to explore? Decisions. All right, let's go ahead and pour this one out. I like this one. It's an Earl Grey tea, but it has just that little bit of vanilla to it, and the leaves and the colors in it are just beautiful. So it has the petals from cornflower, I believe it is, and calendula. Let's see. Dried sunflower, dried cornflower. My bad, not calendula. Cornflower and sunflower petals. It's just beautiful. And then it has that bergamot and vanilla flavor mixed in with the tradition, with the Earl Grey tea. It's really good. Delicious. That's a really nice tea. Let's see. So, before we get to talking about yesterday, hello, good to see you, Helen. Before we get to talking about what we read on Friday, I want to let you know about a little something that I just posted in the group. So this is one of those good news, maybe not so great news things, but the great news actually is that San Diego Public Library is expanding our services. We are finally at that point where we're offering 6 days of service now. So at my library, let's go back. There are 12 libraries offering in-person services, limited in-person services. My particular branch, Pacific Beach, is not one of those libraries. But now instead of just Monday through Friday, now we're offering Monday through Saturday service where you can call us. We can help you with reference. If there's a book that you want to check out, we can pull that book for you, check it out, and bring it out to the table we keep outside of our door. And so we're doing that contactless full pickup service 6 days a week now instead of 5. That's really good news. the slight little thing that's not so great for our group is that because we are now offering 6 days of service and the number of staff we have are the same, that means that like for some of our staff, like myself, I'm now working Monday through Thursday and then I'm alternating Fridays and Saturdays. And so for our readings, what that means is that I'm not going to be available to do a live reading on Friday anymore. And so I wanted to ask you guys what you would prefer. I'm happy to do either. Hey, I see Pam there too. Let's see, as we continue, would you like us to only do the live readings, which means we would drop our schedule down to only reading Monday through Thursday? Or would you like to do Monday through Thursday where we do this live experience together, and then I'll just pre-tape a segment on Friday? Sorry, Pam was asking. I am a payday Saturday, which means I'm off on paydays Fridays, which, sorry, that is so library speak. I worked this past Saturday, so that means I'm working this Friday. This is how we have to figure our schedules. And then the other Friday, the Fridays that I'm off, well, I think it would just be really confusing to have 1 week where we do it one way and 1 week the other. So I'm just thinking I would like us to either go to Monday through Thursday or Monday through Thursday plus the tape segment on Fridays. And so I went ahead and created a poll. It's in our Facebook group. So if you could go ahead and vote as to which you'd prefer, I'd really appreciate it. And that way I know how you guys want us to keep going for the next couple weeks. And, well, we'll see. Actually, Dracula's for 50 more weeks, and then hopefully we'll read another book after that. So, into our future of how we want to continue doing our readings. And so, yeah, I'll let you guys vote on that. I'll let you know by the end of the week what we decide, and we'll proceed from there. So, let's talk a little bit about what we read last week. Last week, there was some interesting things happening in chapter 10. Basically, it started out with most of it centered around Lucy Westenra. Lucy's health was fading. At the very end of chapter 9, there had been Dr. Seward had been communicating with Dr. Van Helsing, and he'd been saying, "Oh, she's doing fine," and then she's like, "Oh my goodness, she is not doing fine. Come over here right away." And that's where chapter 10 began, with John Seward writing to his good friend Arthur Holmwood, letting him know, "Can't really tell you much, but Dr. Van Helsing is coming out to see Lucy, and I'll let you know what we discover afterwards." And then it switches over to an entry from Dr. Seward's diary, where he talks about his discussion with Dr. Van Helsing. And Van Helsing basically says, Lucy is in grave danger right now. She's very weak. She needs this newfangled thing that science has come up with recently. You may have heard of it. It's called a blood transfusion. Again, keep in mind, this book was published in 1897. Sorry, wrong side. 1897. And a lot of the medical procedures, or the new innovations that they're talking about in this book, things like the shorthand alphabet, writing in shorthand, also doing a blood transfusion. These things that we think of as basic standard stuff nowadays, or in the case of shorthand, even something really antiquated, were brand new innovations back in 1897. And so Dr. Van Helsing says, we need to give this woman a transfusion of blood if we're going to keep her alive. And he's like, "I can't do it. I need you. You're younger." And so he's about to literally hook up Dr. Seward to Lucy Westenra and transfer the blood from one person to another. Oh my goodness. But just before they can do it, a knock is heard at the door, and Arthur, the fiance, comes over and he says, like, "I got your letter. I know you can't tell me much, but I want to know what's going on, if I can help in any way." And they say, "Yes, you can help. Let's take your blood, because you're young, you're strong, and you're also, her fiance. You love her." And so it's like, "Let's go ahead and get your blood." And so they literally, they give Lucy some medication. I think it was morphine, or they give her some sort of Westenra and transfer the blood back and forth. Again, with our modern knowledge of science, just kind of, I don't know. I was talking to a friend who donates blood often, and he was saying he thought that was like one of the scariest scenes of the book. Just because it was so unsanitary. And like there's not even any tests to make sure are they the right blood types, it's just blood. They're just giving her blood, whatever kind it is. And so, they give her the blood, and she is doing well. She's doing quite well, actually. It helps her recover. The color comes back to her cheeks. Arthur is, feeling a bit weak, and so Dr. Van Helsing is like, "Well, you've earned a kiss. Go ahead and kiss her." She's passed out, but whatever. He kisses her, and then he leaves and he goes home. Dr. Van Helsing says, "I'm going to go back for now, but I'm going to leave Lucy in your care. What you need to do," and he tells Dr. Seward this very, very particularly, You need to stay awake with her all night while she's sleeping. You need to watch her to make sure that nothing changes for the worse. Again, we know that he's suspicious of there being a vampire about, but yeah, but Dr. Seward doesn't realize this. And in fact, actually, there was also a scene too in here in this chapter where Dr. Van Helsing advises Dr. Seward, as you're writing your notes, write anything that seems like it could be possible, even if it's not plausible. I want to get an idea of what you're thinking about this case and the treatment and what, when basically you start to realize that there's a vampire. And I want to try to see what you could be thinking. Also in this chapter too, right before Arthur leaves, they talk about how Lucy had a velvet band that she wears around her throat with jewelry, and that it's moved out of the way, and the two doctors see the two little prick marks in her neck. And Dr. Van Helsing is rather surprised by it, and Dr. Seward says, I just don't know what to make of it just yet. He later on speculates that it seems like she may have lost blood through that, but how is it possible? There's no blood on the sheets. Where could the blood have gone? Where could the blood have gone? Oh my goodness. So, Dr. Seward is advised that he needs to watch Lucy Westenra. He does indeed stay the night, and he watches over her. She wakes up the next day. She's refreshed. She's healthy. She's doing wonderfully. He goes to work. He comes the next evening to her house, and he is going to stay again. By now, he's had, sleepless night, two days of work. He's rather exhausted, and she says, I'm doing so well. You don't need to stay up with me. You're welcome to stay in the room next door to mine. Why don't you leave your door open? I'll leave my door open, and then if I need anything, I'll call out to you. He says that's a great idea, and then he's even drinking at dinner, so he's not going to hear anything. Oh, it's like a recipe for disaster. The next morning, they wake up. Oh, and by the way, it's just terrible. Like, Lucy has a diary entry where she's saying, I feel so healthy, I feel so blessed, I have such good friends, people looking after me, it's going to be wonderful. The next day, when he wakes up, she's doing horribly. And of course, Dr. Van Helsing has come into town, and he shows him, it's like, oh, look how terribly she's doing. It's like, all the progress that has been made has been lost. It's like, she needs more blood. This time it's gotta be you. We can't call her fiance back again. And so they do another transfusion. This time it's Dr. Seward's blood that is given to restore Lucy Westenra. And Van Helsing says, I will stay tonight. You go home, eat, drink, and rest. Make yourself strong. I will stay with her and watch over her. And then I have some ideas about things we can do. And so basically, what Van Helsing ends up doing is that he calls to a friend of his over in Harlem. And again, that's Harlem, H-A-A-R-E-L-M. H-A-A-R-L-E-M. So a Harlem that the New York Harlem was named after from over in the Netherlands. And so he gets his friend who has glass houses and raised plants to send him a bunch of garlic flowers and blossoms. And so Van Helsing decorates Lucy's room basically with all these garlic blossoms. He rubs it along the curtains, along the edges of her windows, and he even makes a wreath for her, which I'm guessing is sort of like a leg or a necklace. And he puts that around her and says, you must keep it on. You must have it, and I need you to sleep in peace. And keep these things, and it's not a joke. She's like, why do you eat dirty garlic? Like, no, you must have it. It's very important. It smells lovely. And he says, do not disturb it, even if the room feels closed. Do not tonight open the window or the door. And so Van Helsing, again, we know that he strongly suspects what is causing the blood loss and her weakness, but he's not saying it yet. And then he tells Van Helsing that to watch a little bit longer, that he has things he needs to check on, and that he's going to go. And so Van Helsing is quite confident at this point that Lucy is going to be protected because of the garlic he's left in the room. But the chapter ended with Seward feeling less sure of that because he had been so certain that Lucy would, recover before that night when, he drank, passed out next to her, and, did not watch her like he was supposed to, and then she woke up feeling rather weak. So, that's where we left off. Today's a shorter chapter, but it's such a good one. Alright, chapter 11, it starts out again with Lucy Westenra's diary. 12 September. How good they all are to me. I quite love that dear Dr. Van Helsing. I wonder why he was so anxious about these flowers. He positively frightened me. He was so fierce. And yet, he must have been right. for I feel comfort from them already. Somehow, I do not dread being alone tonight, and I can go to sleep without fear. I shall not mind any flapping outside the window. Oh, the terrible struggle that I have had against sleep so often of late, the pain of the sleeplessness or the pain of the fear of sleep, and with such unknown horrors as it has for me. How blessed are some people whose lives have no fears, no dreads, to whom sleep is a blessing that comes nightly and brings nothing but sweet dreams. Well, here I am tonight, hoping for sleep, and lying like Ophelia in the play, with virgin krantz and maiden struments. I never liked garlic before, but tonight it is delightful. There is peace in its smell. I feel sleep coming already. Good night, everybody. Dr. Seward's Diary. 13th September. Called at the Berkeley and found Van Helsing, as usual, up to time. The carriage ordered from the hotel was waiting. The professor took his bag, which he always brings with him now. Let all be put down exactly. Van Helsing and I arrived at Killingham at 8 o'clock. It was a lovely morning. The bright sunshine and all the fresh feeling of early autumn seemed like the completion of nature's annual work. The leaves were turning to all kinds of beautiful colors, but had not yet begun to drop from the trees. When we entered, we met Mrs. Westenra coming out of the morning room. She was always an early riser. She greeted us warmly and said, "You will be glad to know that Lucy is better. The dear child is still asleep. I looked into her room and saw her, but did not go in, lest I should disturb her." The professor smiled and looked quite jubilant. He rubbed his hands together and said, "Aha! I thought I had diagnosed the case. My treatment is working." To which she answered, "You must not take all the credit to yourself, doctor. Lucy's state this morning is due in part to me." "Well, how do you mean, ma'am?" asked the professor. "Well, I was anxious about the dear child in the night and went into her room. She was sleeping soundly, so soundly that even my coming did not wake her, but the room was awfully stuffy. There were a lot of those horrible, strong-smelling flowers about everywhere, and she had actually a bunch of them round her neck. I feared that the heavy odor would be too much for the dear child in her weak state, so I took them all away and opened a bit of the window to let in a little fresh air. You will be pleased with her, I am sure." She moved off into her boudoir, where she usually breakfasted early. As she had spoken, I watched the professor's face and saw it turn ashen gray. He had been able to retain his self-command whilst the poor lady was present, for he knew her state and how mischievous a shock would be. He actually smiled on her as he held open the door for her to pass into her room. But the instant she had disappeared, he pulled me, suddenly and forcibly, into the dining room and closed the door. Then, for the first time in my life, I saw Van Helsing break down. He raised his hands over his head in a sort of mute despair, and then beat his palms together in a helpless way. Finally, he sat down on a chair, and putting his hands before his face, began to sob, with loud, dry sobs that seemed to come from the very racking of his heart. Then he raised his arms again, as though appealing to the whole universe. "God, God, God," he said, "what have we done? What has this poor thing done, that we are so sore beset? Is there fate amongst us still, sent down from the pagan world of old, that such things must be, and in this way? This poor mother, all unknowing, and all for the best as she think, does such thing as lose her daughter, body and soul. And we must not tell her, we must not even warn her, or she die, and then both die. Oh, how we are beset! How are all the powers of the devils against us!" Suddenly he jumped to his feet. "Come," he said, "come, we must see and act. Devils or no devils, or all the devils at once, it matters not. We fight him all the same." He went to the hall door for his bag, and together we went up to Lucy's room. Once again I drew up the blind, whilst Van Helsing went towards the bed. This time he did not start as he looked on the poor face with the same awful waxen pallor as before. He wore a look of stern sadness and infinite pity. "As I expected," he murmured, with that hissing inspiration of his which meant so much. Without a word, he went and locked the door, and then began to set out on the little table the instruments for yet another operation of transfusion of blood. I had long ago recognized the necessity and begun to take off my coat, but he stopped me with the warning hand. "No," he said. "Today you must operate. I shall provide. You are weakened already." As he spoke, he took off his coat and rolled up his shirt sleeve. Again, the operation. Again, the narcotic. Again, some return of color to the ashy cheeks and the regular breathing of healthy sleep. This time I watched whilst Van Helsing recruited himself and rested. Presently he took an opportunity of telling Mrs. Westenra that she must not remove anything from Lucy's room without consulting him, that the flowers were of medicinal value, and that the breathing of their odor was a part of the system of cure. Then he took over the care of the case himself, saying that he would watch this night and the next, and would send me word when to come. After another hour, Lucy waked from her sleep, fresh and bright and seemingly not much the worse for her terrible ordeal. What does it all mean? I am beginning to wonder if my long habit of life among the insane is beginning to tell upon my own brain. Lucy Westenra's diary, 17 September. 4 days and nights of peace. I am getting so strong again that I hardly know myself. It is as if I had passed through some long nightmare and had just awakened to see the beautiful sunshine and feel the fresh air of the morning around me. I have a dim remembrance of long, anxious times of waiting and fearing, darkness in which there was not even the pain of hope to make present distress more poignant, and then long spells of oblivion and the rising back to life as a diver coming up through a great press of water. Since, however, Dr. Van Helsing has been with me, all this bad dreaming seems to have passed away. The noises that used to frighten me out of my wits, the flapping against the windows, the distant voices which seemed so close to me, the harsh sounds that came from I know not where and commanded me to do I know not what, have all ceased. I go to bed now without any fear of sleep. I do not even try to stay awake. I have grown quite fond of the garlic, and a boxful arrives for me every day from Haarlem. Tonight, Dr. Van Helsing is going away, as he has to be for a day in Amsterdam, but I need not be watched. I am well enough to be left alone. Thank God for Mother's sake, and dear Arthur's, and for all our friends who have been so kind. I shall not even feel the change, for last night Dr. Van Helsing slept in his chair a lot of the time. I found him asleep twice when I awoke, but I did not fear to go to sleep again, although the boughs or bats or something flapped almost angrily against the window panes. The Pall Mall Gazette, 18 September. The Escaped Wolf. Perilous adventure of our interviewer. Interview with the keeper in the zoological gardens. After many inquiries and almost as many refusals, and perpetually using the words Pall Mall Gazette as a sort of talisman, I managed to find the keeper of the section of the zoological gardens in which the wolf department is included. Thomas Builder lives in one of the cottages in the enclosure behind the elephant house, and was just sitting down to his tea when I found him. Thomas and his wife are hospitable folk, elderly and without children, and if the specimen I enjoyed of their hospitality be of the average kind, their lives must be pretty comfortable. The keeper would not enter on what he called business until the supper was over, and we were all satisfied. Then, when the table was cleared and he had lit his pipe, he said, "Now, sir, you can go on and ask me what you want. You'll excuse me refusing to talk of professional subjects afore meals. I gives the wolves and the jackals and the hyenas in all our section their tea afore I begins to ask them questions." "How do you mean, ask them questions?" I queried, wishful to get him into a talkative humor. "Hitting of them over the head with a pole is one way, scratching of their ears is another. When gents as is flush wants a bit of a show to their gals, I don't so much mind the fust, the hitting with a pole afore I chucks in their dinner, but I waits till they've had their sherry and coffee, so to speak, afore I tries on with the ear scratching. Mind you," he added philosophically, "there is a deal of the same nature in us as in them theer animals. Here's you a comin' and arskin of me questions about me business, and I that grump like that only for your bloomin' are quit, it has seen you blowed fuss before I'd answer. Not even when you asked me sarcastic like if I'd like you to ask the superintendent if I might ask me questions. Without offense, did I tell you to go to L? You did. And when you said you'd report me for using obscene language, that was hitting me over the head. But the Arquid made that all right. I weren't a-going to fight, so I waited for the food and did with my owl as the wolves and lions and tigers does. But Lord love your heart, now that the old woman has stuck a chunk of her tea cake in me and rinsed me out with her bloomin' old teapot, and I've lit up, you may scratch my ears for all you're worth, and I won't get even a growl out of me. Drive along with your questions. I know what you're a-comin' at, and that there escaped wolf. Exactly. I want you to give me your view of it. Just tell me how it happened, and when I know the facts, I'll get you to say what you consider was the cause of it, and how you think the whole affair will end. All right, Governor. This here is about the old story. That 'ere wolf, what we call Berserker, was one of 3 grey ones that come from Norway to Jamrocks, which we bought off him 4 years ago. He was a nice, well-behaved wolf that never gave no trouble to talk of. I am more surprised at him for wanting to get out nor any other animal in this place, but there you can't trust wolves no more nor women. Don't you mind him, sir, broke in Mrs. Tom with a cheery laugh. He's got minding the animals so long, the blessed if he ain't like an old wolf himself. But there ain't no harm in him. Well, sir, it was about 2 hours after feeding yesterday when I first heard my disturbance. I was making up a litter in the monkey house for a young puma which is ill, but when I heard the yelping and owling, I came straight away. There was the circle about that day, and close at hand was only one man, a tall, thin chap, with a hook nose and a pointed beard, with a few white hairs running through it. He had a hard, cold look and red eyes, and I took a sort of mislike to him, for it seemed as if it was him as they was irritated at. He had white kid gloves on his hands, and he pointed out the animals to me and said, Keeper, these wolves seem upset at something. Maybe it's you, says I, for I did not like the airs as he give himself. He didn't get angry as I hoped he would, but he smiled a kind of insolent smile, with a mouth full of white sharp teeth. Oh no, they wouldn't like me, he says. Oh yes they would, says I, imitating of him. They always like a bone or two to clean their teeth on about tea time, which you as a bad wolf. Well, it was an odd thing, but when the animals see us a-talking, they lay down, and when I went over to Berserker, he let me stroke his ears, same as ever. That there man came over, and blessed but if he didn't put in his hand and stroke the old wolf's ears too. Take care, says I. Berserker is quick. Never mind, he says. I'm used to 'em. Are you in the business yourself? I says, taking my hat. Taking off my hat, for a man what trades in wolves and cetera is a good friend to keepers. No, says he, not exactly in the business, but I have made pets of several. And with that, he lifts his hat as polite as a lord and walks away. Old Berserker kept a looking after him till he was out of sight, and then went and lay down in a corner and wouldn't come out all evening. Well, last night, so soon as the moon was up, the wolves here all began howling. There wasn't nothing for 'em to owl at. There weren't no one near, except someone that was evidently a-calling a dog somewheres out back of the gardens in the park road. Once or twice I went out to see that all was right, and it was, and then the owling stopped, just before 12 o'clock. I just took a look round before turning in, and bust me, but when I came opposite to old Berserker's cage, I see the rails broken and twisted about, and the cage empty. And that's all I know for certain. Did anyone else see anything? One of our gardeners was a-comin' home about that time from a harmony, when he sees a big grey dog coming out through the gardening edges. At least so he says, but I don't give much for it myself. For if he did, he never said a word about it to his missus when he got home, and it was only after the escape of the wolf was made known, and we had been up all night a-hunting of the park for Berserker, that he remembered seeing anything. My own belief was that the harmony had got into his head. Now, Mr. Builder, can you account in any way for the escape of the wolf? Well, sir, he said with a suspicious sort of modesty, I think I can, but I don't know as how you'd be satisfied with the theory. Certainly I shall. If a man like you, who knows the animals from experience, can't hazard a good guess at any rate, who is even to try? Well then, sir, I account for it this way. It seems to me that ere wolf escaped, simply because he wanted to get out. From the hearty way that both Thomas and his wife laughed at the joke, I could see that it had done service before, and that the whole explanation was simply an elaborate sell. I couldn't cope in badinage with the worthy Thomas, but I thought I knew a surer way to his heart, so I said, Now, Mr. Builder, we'll consider that first half-sovereign worked off, and this brother of his is waiting to be claimed, when you've told me what you think will happen. Right you are, sir, he said briskly. You'll excuse me, I know, for a chapping of ya, but the old woman here winked at me, which is as much as telling me to go on. Well, I never, said the old lady. My opinion is this, that ere wolf is a hiding of somewheres. The gardener what didn't remember said he was a galloping northward faster than a horse could go, but I don't believe him, for you see, sir, wolves don't gallop no more nor dogs does, they not being built that way. Wolves is fine things in a storybook, and I dessay when they gets in packs and does be chivvying something that's more afeard than they is, they can make a devil of a noise and chop it up, whatever it is. But Lord bless you, in real life, a wolf is only a little creature, not half so clever or bold as a good dog, and not half a quarter so much fight in him. This one ain't been used to fighting, or even to providing for himself, and more like he's somewhere round the park a-hiding and a-shivering of, and if he thinks at all, wondering where he is to get his breakfast from. Or maybe he's got down some area and is in a cold cellar. My eye, won't some cook get a rum start when she sees his green eyes a-shining on her out of the dark? If he can't get food, he's bound to look for it, and mayhap he may chance to light on a butcher's shop in time. If he doesn't, and some nursemaid goes a-walking a horse with a soldier, leaving of the infant in the perambulator, well, then I shouldn't be surprised if the census is one babby the less. That's all. I was handing him the half-sovereign when something came bobbing up against the window, and Mr. Builder's face doubled its natural length with a surprise. God bless me, he said, if that ain't old Berserker come back by himself. He went to the door and opened it. A most unnecessary proceeding, it seemed to me. I have always thought that a wild animal never looks so well as when some obstacle of pronounced durability is between us. A personal experience has intensified rather than diminished that idea. After all, however, there was nothing like custom, for neither Builder nor his wife thought any more of the wolf than I should of a dog. The animal itself was as peaceful and well-behaved as that father of all picture wolves, Red Riding Hood's quondam friend, whilst moving her confidence in masquerade. The whole scene was an unutterable mixture of comedy and pathos. The wicked wolf that for half a day had paralyzed London and set all the children in the town shivering in their shoes was there in a sort of penitent mood, and was received and petted like a sort of vulpine prodigal son. Old Builder examined him all over with most tender solicitude, and when he had finished with his penitence said, There, I knew the poor old chap would get into some kind of trouble. Didn't I say it all along? Here's his head all cut and full of broken glass. He's been a-getting over some bloomin' wall or other. It's a shame that people are allowed to top their walls with broken bottles. This here's what comes of it. Come along, Berserker. He took the wolf and locked him up in a cage with a piece of meat that satisfied, in quantity at any rate, the elementary conditions of the fatted calf, and went off to report. I came off too, to report the only exclusive information that is given today regarding the strange escapade at the zoo. Dr. Seward's Diary, 17th September. I was engaged after dinner in my study posting up my books, which, through press of other work and the many visits to Lucy, had fallen sadly into arrear. Suddenly, the door was burst open, and in rushed my patient with his face distorted with passion. I was thunderstruck, for such a thing as a patient getting of his own accord into the superintendent's study was almost unknown. Without an instant's pause, he made straight at me. He had a dinner knife in his hand, and as I saw he was dangerous, I tried to keep the table between us. He was too quick and too strong for me, however, for before I could get my balance, he had struck at me and cut my left wrist rather severely. Before he could strike again, however, I got in my right, and he was sprawling on his back on the floor. My wrist bled freely, and quite a little pool trickled onto the carpet. I saw that my friend was not intent on further effort, and occupied myself binding up my wrist, keeping a wary eye on the prostrate figure all the time. When the attendants rushed in and we turned our attention to him, his employment positively sickened me. He was lying on his belly on the floor, licking up, like a dog, the blood which had fallen from my wounded wrist. He was easily secured, and to my surprise went with the attendants quite placidly, simply repeating over and over again, "The blood is the life. The blood is the life." I cannot afford to lose blood just at present. I have lost too much of late for my physical good, and then the prolonged strain of Lucy's illness and its horrible phases is telling on me. I am overexcited and weary, and I need rest, rest, rest. Happily, Van Helsing has not summoned me, so I need not forego my sleep. Tonight, I could not well do without it. Telegram. Van Helsing, Antwerp, to Seward, Carfax. Sent to Carfax, Sussex, as no county given. Delivered late by 22 hours. 17 September. Do not fail to be at Hillingham tonight. If not watching all the time, frequently visit and see that flowers are in place. Very important. Do not fail. Shall be with you as soon as possible after arrival. Dr. Seward's diary. 18 September. Just off train to London. The arrival of Van Helsing's telegram filled me with dismay. A whole night lost, and I know by bitter experience what may happen in a night. Of course, it is possible that all may be well, but what may have happened? Surely there is some horrible doom hanging over us that every possible accident should thwart us in all we try to do. I shall take this cylinder with me, and then I can complete my entry on Lucy's phonograph. Memorandum left by Lucy Westenra. 17 September, night. I write this and leave it to be seen, so that no one may by any chance get into trouble through me. This is an exact record of what took place tonight. I feel I am dying of weakness and have barely strength to write, but it must be done if I die in the doing. I went to bed as usual, taking care that the flowers were placed as Dr. Van Helsing directed, and soon fell asleep. I was waked by the flapping at the window, which had begun after that sleepwalking on the cliff at Whitby, when Nina saved me, but which now I know so well. I was not afraid, but I did wish that Dr. Seward was in the next room, as Dr. Van Helsing said he would be, so that I might have called him. I tried to go to sleep, but I could not. Then there came to me the old fear of sleep, and I determined to keep awake. Perversely, sleep would try to come then when I did not want it. So, as I feared to be alone, I opened my door and called out, "Is there anybody there?" There was no answer. I was afraid to wake Mother, and so closed my door again. Then outside in the shrubbery, I heard a sort of howl like a dog's, but more fierce and deeper. I went to the window and looked out, but could see nothing except a big bat, which had evidently been buffeting its wings against the window. So I went back to bed again, but determined not to go to sleep. Presently the door opened, and Mother looked in. Seeing by my moving that I was not asleep, came in and sat by me. She said to me even more sweetly and softly than her wont, "I was uneasy about you, darling, and came in to see that you were all right." I feared she might catch cold sitting there, and asked her to come in and sleep with me, so she came into bed and lay down beside me. She did not take off her dressing gown, for she said she would only stay a while and then go back to her own bed. As she lay there in my arms, and I in hers, the flapping and buffeting came to the window again. She was startled and a little frightened, and cried out, "What is that?" I tried to pacify her, and at last succeeded, and she lay quiet. But I could hear her poor dear heart still beating terribly. After a while there was the howl again out in the shrubbery, and shortly after that was a crash at the window, and a lot of broken glass was hurled on the floor. The window blind blew back with the wind that rushed in, and in the aperture of the broken panes, there was the head of a great, gaunt, gray wolf. Mother cried out in affright and struggled up into a seating posture and clutched wildly at anything that would help her. Amongst other things, she clutched the wreath of flowers that Dr. Van Helsing insisted on my wearing round my neck and tore it away from me. For a second or two she sat up, pointing at the wolf, and there was a strange and horrible gurgling in her throat. Then she fell over, as if struck with lightning, and her head hit my forehead and made me dizzy for a moment or two. The room and all round seemed to spin round. I kept my eyes fixed on the window, but the wolf drew his head back, and a whole myriad of little specks seems to come blowing in through the broken window and wheeling and circling round like the pillar of dust that travelers describe when there is a simoon in the desert. I tried to stir, but there was some spell upon me and dear mother's poor body, which seemed to grow cold already, for her dear heart had ceased to beat, weighed me down, and I remembered no more for a while. The time did not seem long, but very, very awful, till I recovered consciousness again. Somewhere near, a passing bell was tolling. The dogs all around the neighborhood were howling, and in our shrubbery, seemingly just outside, a nightingale was singing. I was dazed and stupid with pain and terror and weakness, but the sound of the nightingale seemed like the voice of my dead mother come back to comfort me. The sounds seemed to have awakened the maids too, for I could hear their bare feet pattering. The wind rushed in through the broken window, and the door slammed to. They lifted off the body of my dear mother and laid her, covered up with a sheet, on the bed after I had got up. They were all so frightened and nervous that I directed them to go to the dining room and have each a glass of wine. The door flew open for an instant and closed again. The maid shrieked and then went in a body to the dining room, and I laid what flowers I had on my dear mother's breast. When they were there, I remembered what Dr. Van Helsing had told me, but I didn't like to remove them, and besides, I would have some of the servants to sit up with me now. I was surprised that the maids did not come back. I called them, but got no answer, so I went to the dining room to look for them. My heart sank when I saw what had happened. They all four lay helpless on the floor, breathing heavily. The decanter of sherry was on the table half full, but there was a queer, acrid smell about it. I was suspicious and examined the decanter. It smelled of laudanum, and looking on the sideboard, I found that the bottle which Mother's doctor uses for her, did use, was empty. What am I to do? What am I to do? I am back in the room with Mother. I cannot leave her, and I am alone, save for the sleeping servants whom someone has drugged. Alone with the dead. I dare not go out, for I can hear the low howl of the wolf through the broken window. The air seems full of specks, floating and circling in the draught from the window, and the lights burn blue and dim. What am I to do? God shield me from harm this night. I shall hide this paper in my breast, where they shall find it when they come to lay me out. My dear mother gone. It is time that I go too. Goodbye, dear Arthur, if I should not survive this night. God keep you, dear, and God help me. Wow! That was very dramatic. I'm not reading ahead, as you guys may have figured out. That went from the comedic bit of the zookeeper talking about the wolf that had disappeared to finding out what that wolf had done on behest of Dracula. Oh my goodness. All right, we'll have to continue tomorrow to see if Lucy Westenra survives the night. We know Dr. Seward is a terrible, terrible babysitter. But yeah, we'll see what happens tomorrow in chapter 12. Oh, I'm really, really going to have to fight the temptation to read ahead. All right, I'm going to not do it so we can discover this together tomorrow. But that was a lovely cliffhanger. Oh my goodness. Okay, so we're going to end today's reading. As I did mention at the beginning, if you do have a chance to go ahead and vote in the poll as to how you would like us to continue, if we should drop down to just Monday through Thursday for the live streams, or if we should do the Monday through Thursday live streams supplemented by a recording on Fridays, just let me know what your preference is. and we'll go from there. All right, so thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed today's reading. I certainly did. I feel a lot of suspense about what's going to happen tomorrow. Okay, so I'll see you then. I'll see you tomorrow for more reading of Dracula by Bram Stoker. And until then, I hope you have a great rest of your day. Take care. Bye. Welcome back. I'm Christina, the manager at the Pacific Beach Library. Thank you for joining me for day 12 of our read-along together of, ready, let's go for it, Dracula by Bram Stoker. And so, let's see, this smells so good. You've heard me talk about this tea a lot if you've been reading with me for a while. Hello, good to see you. Out of curiosity, for anyone who's here today, are you drinking anything fun? Also, are you reading anything fun outside of Dracula? I always like to see what folks are reading. I get good ideas from it. Not that I don't already have a huge pile of books at home to read, but you know how it is. You can always have more books to read. That's delicious. And more teas to drink. Alright, so let's talk a little bit before we get into the reading. I posted a poll yesterday afternoon. So far, as of right before we went into today's reading, I looked at the poll results. 8 people had voted that they wanted us to just do the live readings, so that means we would only post readings Monday through Thursday, and no one had voted for the option of having a taped reading on Friday. So I'm just going to call it right now. I figure we've got our decision made. So I'm just going to go ahead and after this week, I'm going to just do the readings Monday through Thursday. This week, I'm going to do one last Friday reading, and the reason is that it just works out with the timing, with the number of chapters that we have, that if we do a reading this Friday and then only Monday through Thursday for the rest of the readings, we will finish up on Thursday, October 29th, which means by Halloween, we will have the conclusion of our tale of Dracula. And then we can make a decision too if we want to maybe have a little party either the following Monday or perhaps on Halloween itself. Ooh. So we'll figure that out later. But for now, the decision has been made. We're going to go ahead and just do the live streams, and our last live stream will be this Friday. Our last Friday live stream will be this Friday, and then we'll keep going after that with just Monday through Thursday readings together. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what happened in yesterday's chapter of Dracula. Yesterday in chapter 11, it was really good. It started out with Lucy Westenra talking about how, fortunate she felt that all these folks were taking care of her. And then Dr. Van Helsing was saying, he was quite smug because he knew that he had left Lucy Westenra surrounded by garlic blossoms and that there was no way that any unwanted visitors of the vampiric sort would be able to enter her room. And when he arrives at the house, again, he's quite happy. Neither he nor Dr. Seward stayed the night because Dr. Van Helsing was so confident that Lucy would be fine. And when they go in there, they run into Lucy's mother, who says, "Oh yes, she's sleeping like an angel. She's not disturbed at all. She's just so calm." And he's like, "Wow, that's great." Because he's like patting himself on the back, like it's because of my wonderful garlic. And then she continues, "Well, it's not all you. I also helped her. I noticed you had these stinky garlic flowers even on her, and so I took them off of her, and I opened the windows, and I aired out the room so she wouldn't get suffocated by the garlic." It's like, no! And he didn't want to say anything directly to her because we know that Mrs. Westenra has, she's in poor health and she doesn't need a shock. But of course, when he goes in, he sees that Lucy has, lost more blood in the night, that Dracula did come in. And so he actually, this time, he gives a blood transfusion. So Dr. Van Helsing is the blood donor this time to try to revive Lucy Westenra. After that, there's, the doctor continues to watch over her to make sure that she has the necessary garlic. He warns her mother specifically that, this is part of her treatment. Even if it stinks a little bit, you just need to keep it there. And Lucy is actually really pleased. She's saying how, she seems to be doing so well. She is, she's finally even gotten used to the smell of garlic. She's so happy. She's so healthy. She's so grateful for Dr. Van Helsing and his kind care for her. And then, so that was on the night of the 17th of September. What's interesting after that is that there is a snippet mixed in next from the Pall Mall Gazette, which is a newspaper where the reporter talks with a zookeeper. Now, I'm also going to throw in here, too, a little bit of just my own commentary. I do not understand. Maybe this is how they used to do news reports back in the late 1800s. But I cannot believe that there was any news reporter that's actually printing in the dialect of this zookeeper. And as many quotes as he's giving this man about the joke he tells and about the bribery that he's taking to speak with the reporter and all this kind of stuff. Like, if that's actually the newspaper, I need to read more news reports from the 1890s, because this stuff is fun. But perhaps, who knows. In this book, though, with the report from the Pall Mall Gazette, it has a wonderfully colorful account from the zookeeper talking about this wolf that he has there at the zoo, and the strange man, Dracula, who pets the wolf's ears and, kind of weirds out the zookeeper, but the wolf seems okay with it. And then the wolf, he hears a bunch of howling that night, and the wolf takes off. The wolf eventually comes back the next day, on the 18th, and they see that the wolf has glass mixed into the fur on his head, because he appears to have, gone through, somehow encountered some broken glass. And so the zookeeper takes back the wolf, and the reporter celebrates that the community need not be afraid any longer. There's a wolf on the prowl. Then we go back. So that's published on the 18th. What we find out then is that going back to the 17th, Dr. Seward mentions how he is grateful not to have to go to visit Lucy Westenra's house that night. He's very tired yet again. He is, he's given blood, he's watched over her, he's tired. Also, that evening, his strange patient, Renfield, comes in and stabs him, or strikes him, and he causes blood to drip from Dr. Seward's wrist onto the ground. He bandages up his wrist, and then when he looks down, he sees Renfield lapping up the blood like an animal, drinking it off the ground. It's disgusting. And Renfield saying, "Blood is life. The blood is the life." Continues then with an account of Dr. Seward noting that there had been a telegram delivered from Dr. Van Helsing to him, which was not properly directed. It didn't live with the county in which it was to be delivered, and so therefore the telegram came 22 hours late. So, being a day late, Dr. Seward had not realized he was meant to watch over Lucy that night on the 17th, so she had been unattended that evening. Again, Dr. Seward, terrible, terrible gatekeeper. He might be a good doctor, but he is the worst babysitter. Just terrible. Okay, that said, he rushes then over to visit, to check on Lucy Westenra. And he's saying that he's worried about having received this he's worried about receiving this telegram, and so he is, he's going to continue his journal entry once he gets to Lucy's. The next thing we see, the last thing we see in that chapter, is actually a journal entry from Lucy Westenra herself. She writes a note saying how basically she is sure that she is weak and that she's dying and that she may not even make it till morning, and that she is very disturbed because even though she's been sleeping so soundly and so without fear, she has woken up to hear again the sounds of like a bat or something flapping outside of her window, a bat or a bird flapping. And again, we know it's Dracula. And she's quite disturbed and she's trying to rest. She looks out the window, she sees nothing but a big bat. And then her mother comes in to see her, her very ill mother. And the mother comes in and decides to lie in the bed with Lucy. And she's also disturbed by this noise, the flapping outside, but Lucy tries to reassure her. Suddenly, the window smashes apart when a wolf, the wolf that Dracula had compelled to leave the zoo, rushes in, breaks the glass, and then the mother is so disturbed, she reaches for things and she pulls the garlic flower, the floral wreath off of Lucy, which again is making her vulnerable to the vampire. It all just goes down from there. The mother ends up passing out from the shock, she dies. Lucy is, gets confused by what's happening, and we can presume that Dracula is coming in. The mother dies. The maids come in because they hear the noise, and they're all disturbed about what's going on. She sends the maids down to each have a glass of wine, like to restore them because they've had such a shock upon finding the mother there. And then this is where it gets weird too. When Lucy goes down to see why aren't the maids coming back, she sees that the laudanum that the mother normally takes, which is a, what's the word for that? A sedative. that the laudanum apparently has been mixed into the wine by someone, and that the maids are all drugged, and so they're passed out. She's basically alone in the house. The servants are passed out, they've been drugged. Her dead mother is in bed with her. She feels weak and tired, so again, Dracula's already sucked some of her blood and her life force out of her again. And she is just thoroughly disturbed. She is afraid that she's not going to make it to morning. She writes this note and says, I'm going to hide the paper on my breast so that when they find it, when they find my body, they will find this note as well. And she just isn't even sure if she's going to make it to morning. So, oh, the drama. Okay, now we're going to continue with chapter 12, which begins with Dr. Seward's diary. I need a drink too for this. For those of you who have not read it, maybe comment now. Decide for yourself. Do you think Lucy made it through the night, or will she be dead by the time they come? I'm trying to decide if I think she'll be dead or alive. I'm voting for still barely alive, but I don't know. Put your comment if you think, right, what your thoughts are. All right, let's go in and find out. Chapter 12, Dr. Seward's Diary, 18 September. I drove at once to Hillingham and arrived early. Keeping my cab at the gate, I went up the avenue alone. I knocked gently and rang as quietly as possible, for I feared to disturb Lucy or her mother, and hoped to only bring a servant to the door. After a while, finding no response, I knocked and rang again. Still no answer. I cursed the laziness of the servants that they should lie abed at such an hour, for it was now 10 o'clock, and so rang and knocked again, but more impatiently, but still without response. Hitherto I had blamed only the servants, but now a terrible fear began to assail me. Was this desolation but another link in the chain of doom which seems drawing tight round us? Was it indeed a house of death to which I had come too late? I know that minutes, even seconds of delay might mean hours of danger to Lucy if she had had again one of those frightful relapses, and I went round the house to try if I could find by chance an entry anywhere. I could find no means of ingress. Every window and door was fastened and locked, and I returned baffled to the porch. As I did so, I heard the rapid pit-pat of a swiftly driven horse's feet. They stopped at the gate, and a few seconds later I met Van Helsing running up the avenue. When he saw me, he gasped out, "Then it was you, and just arrived. How is she? Are we too late? Did you not get my telegram?" I answered as quickly and coherently as I could that I had only got his telegram early in the morning and had not lost a minute in coming here, and that I could not make anyone in the house hear me. He paused and raised his hat as he said solemnly, "Then I fear we are too late. God's will be done." With his usual recuperative energy, he went on, "Come, if there be no way open to get in, we must make one. Time is all in all to us now." We went round to the back of the house where there was a kitchen window. The professor took a small surgical saw from his case and, handing it to me, pointed to the iron bars which guarded the window. I attacked them at once and had very soon cut through 3 of them. Then with the long, thin knife, we pushed back the fastening of the sashes and opened the window. I helped the professor in and followed him. There was no one in the kitchen or in the servants' rooms, which were close at hand. We tried all the rooms as we went along, and in the dining room, dimly lit by rays of light through the shutters, found 4 servant women lying on the floor. There was no need to think them dead, for their stertorous breathing and the acrid smell of laudanum in the room left no doubt as to their condition. Van Helsing and I looked at each other, and as we moved away, he said, "We can attend to them later." Then we ascended to Lucy's room. For an instant or two, we paused at the door to listen, but there was no sound we could hear. With white faces and trembling hands, we opened the door gently and entered the room. How shall I describe what we saw? On the bed lay 2 women, Lucy and her mother. The latter lay farthest in, and she was covered with a white sheet, the edge of which had been blown back by the drop through the broken window, showing the drawn white face with the look of terror fixed upon it. By her side lay Lucy, with face white and still more drawn. The flowers which had been round her neck we found upon her mother's bosom, and her throat was bare, showing the 2 little wounds which we had noticed before, but looking horribly white and mangled. Without a word, the professor bent over the bed. his head almost touching poor Lucy's breast. Then he gave a quick turn of his head as of one who listens, and leaping to his feet, he cried out to me, "It is not yet too late. Quick, quick, bring the brandy." I flew downstairs and returned with it, taking care to smell and taste it, lest it too were drugged like the decanter of sherry which I found on the table. The maids were still breathing, but more restlessly, and I fancied that the narcotic was wearing off. I did not stay to make sure, but returned to Van Helsing. He rubbed the brandy, as on another occasion, on her lips and gums, and on her wrists and the palms of her hands. He said to me, "I can do this, all that can be at the present. You go wake those maids, flick them in the face with a wet towel, and flick them hard. Make them get heat and fire and a warm bath. This poor soul is nearly as cold as that beside her. She will need be heated before we can do anything more." I went at once and found little difficulty in waking 3 of the women. The 4th was only a young girl, and the drug had evidently affected her more strongly, so I lifted her on the sofa and let her sleep. The others were dazed at first, but as remembrance came back to them, they cried and sobbed in hysterical manner. I was stern with them, however, and would not let them talk. I told them that one life was bad enough to lose, and that if they delayed, they would sacrifice Miss Lucy. So, sobbing and crying, they went about their way, half clad as they were, and prepared fire and water. Fortunately, the kitchen and boiler fires were still alive, and there was no lack of hot water. We got a bath and carried Lucy out as she was and placed her in it. Whilst we were busy chafing her limbs, there was a knock at the hall door. One of the maids ran off, hurried on some more clothes, and opened it. Then she returned and whispered to us that there was a gentleman who had come with a message from Mr. Holmwood. I bade her simply tell him that he must wait, for we could see no one now. She went away with the message, and, engrossed with our work, I clean forgot all about him. I never saw in all my experience the professor work in such deadly earnest. I knew, as he knew, that it was a stand-up fight with death, and in a pause told him so. He answered me in a way that I did not understand, but with the sternest look that his face could wear. If that were all, I would stop here where we are now, and let her fade away into peace, for I see no light in life over her horizon. He went on with his work with, if possible, renewed and more frenzied vigor. Presently we both began to be conscious that the heat was beginning to be of some effect. Lucy's heart beat a trifle more audibly to the stethoscope, and her lungs had a perceptible movement. Van Helsing's face almost beamed, and as we lifted her from the bath and rolled her in a hot sheet to dry her, he said to me, "The first game is ours. Check to the king." We took Lucy into another room, which had by now been prepared, and laid her in bed and forced a few drops of brandy down her throat. I noticed that Van Helsing tied a soft silk handkerchief round her neck. She was still unconscious, and quite as bad as, if not worse than, we had ever seen her. Van Helsing called in one of the women and told her to stay with her and not to take her eyes off her till we returned, and then beckoned me out of the room. "We must consult as to what is to be done," he said as we descended the stairs. In the hall he opened the dining room door, and we passed in, he closing the door carefully behind him. The shutters had been opened, but the blinds were already down, with that obedience to the etiquette of death which the British woman of the lower classes always rigidly observes. The room was therefore dimly dark. It was, however, light enough for our purposes. Van Helsing's sternness was somewhat relieved by a look of perplexity. He was evidently torturing his mind about something, so I waited for an instant, and he spoke. "What are we to do now? Where are we to turn for help? We must have another transfusion of blood, and that soon, or that poor girl's life won't be worth an hour's purchase. You are exhausted already. I am exhausted too. I fear to trust those women, even if they would have courage to submit. What are we to do for someone who will open his veins for her? What's the matter with me, anyhow?" The voice came from the sofa across the room, and its tones brought relief and joy to my heart, for they were those of Quincy Morris. Van Helsing started angrily at the first sound, but his face softened, and a glad look came into his eyes as I cried out, "Quincy Morris!" and rushed towards him with outstretched hands. "What brought you here?" I cried as our hands met. "I guess art is the cause." He handed me a telegram. Have not heard from Seward for 3 days, and am terribly anxious. Cannot leave. Father still in same condition. Send me word how Lucy is. Do not delay. Homewood. I think I came just in the nick of time. You know you have only to tell me what to do. Van Helsing strode forward and took his hand, looking him straight in the eyes as he said, "A brave man's blood is the best thing on this earth when a woman is in trouble. You're a man and no mistake. Well, the devil may work against us for all he's worth, but God sends us men when we want them." Once again we went through that ghastly operation. I have not the heart to go through with the details. Lucy had got a terrible shock, and it told on her more than before, for though plenty of blood went into her veins, her body did not respond to the treatment as well as on the other occasions. Her struggle back into life was something frightful to see and hear. However, the action of both heart and lungs improved, and Van Helsing made a subcutaneous injection of morphia, as before, and with good effect. Her faint became a profound slumber. The professor watched whilst I went downstairs with Quincy Morris, and sent one of the maids to pay off one of the cabmen who were waiting. I left Quincy lying down after having a glass of wine and told the cook to get ready a good breakfast. Then a thought struck me, and I went back to the room where Lucy now was. When I came softly in, I found Van Helsing with a sheet or two of notepaper in his hand. He had evidently read it, and was thinking it over as he sat with his hand to his brow. There was a look of grim satisfaction in his face, as of one who has had a doubt solved. He handed me the paper, saying only, "It dropped from Lucy's breast when we carried her to the bath." When I had read it, I stood looking at the professor, and after a pause asked him, "In God's name, what does it all mean? Was she, or is she, mad? Or what sort of horrible danger is it?" I was so bewildered that I did not know what to say more. Van Helsing put out his hand and took the paper, saying, "Do not trouble about it now. Forget it for the present. You shall know and understand it all in good time, but it will be later. And now, what is it that you came to me to say?" This brought me back to fact, and I was all myself again. "I came to speak about the certificate of death. If we do not act properly and wisely, there may be an inquest, and that paper would have to be produced. I am in hopes that we need have no inquest, for if we had, it would surely kill poor Lucy, if nothing else did. I know, and you know, and the other doctor who attended her knows, that Mrs. Westenra had disease of the heart, and we can certify that she died of it. Let us fill the certificate at once, and I shall take it myself to the registrar and go on to the undertaker." "Good, oh my friend John. Well thought of. Truly Miss Lucy, if she be sad in the foes that beset her, is at least happy in the friends that love her. 1, 2, 3, all open their veins for her, besides one old man. Ah, yes, I know. Friend John, I am not blind. I love you all the more for it. Now go." In the hall I met Quincy Morris with a telegram from Arthur telling him that Mrs. Westenra was dead, that Lucy also had been ill but was now going on better, and that Van Helsing and I were with her. I told him where I was going, and he hurried me out. But as I was going, said, "When you come back, Jack, may I have 2 words with you all to ourselves?" I nodded in reply and went out. I found no difficulty about the registration, and arranged with the local undertaker to come up in the evening to measure for the coffin and to make arrangements. When I got back, Quincy was waiting for me. I told him I would see him as soon as I knew about Lucy, and went up to her room. She was still sleeping, and the professor seemingly had not moved from his seat at her side. From his putting his finger to his lips, I gathered that he had awake before long, and was afraid of forestalling danger. So I went down to Quincy and took him into the breakfast room where the blinds were not drawn down, and which was a little more cheerful, or rather less cheerless than the other rooms. When we were alone, he said to me, "Jack Seward, I don't want to shove myself in anywhere where I have no right to be, but this is no ordinary case. You know I loved that girl and wanted to marry her, but although that's all past and gone, I can't help feeling anxious about her all the same. What is it that's wrong with her? The Dutchman, and a fine old fellow he is, I can see that, said that time you two came in the room that you must have another transfusion of blood and that both you and he were exhausted. Now I know well that you medical men speak in camera and that a man must not expect to know what they consult about in private. But this is no common matter, and whatever it is, I have done my part. Is not that so? That's so, I said. And he went on, I take it that both you and Van Helsing had done already what I did today? Is not that so? That's so. And I guess Art is in it too. When I saw him 4 days ago down at his own place, he looked queer. I have not seen anything pulled down so quick since I was on the campus. I had a mare that I was fond of go to grass all in one night. One of those big bats that they call vampires had got at her in the night. And what with his gorge and the vein left open, there wasn't enough blood on her to let her stand up. And I had to put a bullet through her as she lay. Jack, you may tell me without betraying confidence. Arthur was the first. Is not that so? As he spoke, the poor fellow looked terribly anxious. He was in a torturous suspense regarding the woman he loved, and his utter ignorance of the terrible mystery which seemed to surround her intensified his pain. His very heart was bleeding, and it took all the manhood of him, and there was a royal lot of it too, to keep him from breaking down. I paused before answering, for I felt that I must not betray anything which the professor wished he kept secret. But already he knew so much, he guessed so much, that there could be no reason for not answering. So I answered in the same phrase, that's so. And how long has this been going on? About 10 days. 10 days. Then I guess, Jack Stewart, that poor pretty creature that we all love has had put into her veins within that time the blood of 4 strong men. Man alive, her whole body would hold it. Then coming close to me, he spoke in a fierce half whisper. What took it out? I shook my head. That, I said, is the crux. Van Helsing is simply frantic about it, and I am at my wit's end. I can't even hazard a guess. There has been a series of little circumstances which have thrown out all our calculations as to Lucy being properly watched, but these shall not occur again. Here we stay until all be well or ill. Quincy held out his hand. Count me in, he said. You and the Dutchman will tell me what to do, and I'll do it. When she woke late in the afternoon, Lucy's first movement was to feel in her breast, and to my surprise, produced the paper which Van Helsing had given me to read. The careful professor had replaced it where it had come from, lest on waking she should be alarmed. Her eyes then lit on Van Helsing and on me too, and glad. Then she looked round the room, and seeing where she was, shuddered. She gave a loud cry and put her poor thin hands before her pale face. We both understood what was meant, that she realized to the full her mother's death. So we tried what we could to comfort her. Doubtless sympathy eased her somewhat, but she was very low in thought and spirits, and wept silently and weakly for a long time. We told her that either or both of us would now remain with her all the time, and that seemed to comfort her. Towards dusk, she fell into a doze. Here, a very odd thing occurred. Whilst still asleep, she took the paper from her breast and tore it in two. Van Helsing stepped over and took the pieces from her. All the same, however, she went on with the action of tearing, as though the material were still in her hands. Finally, she lifted her hands and opened them as if scattering the fragments. Van Helsing seemed surprised, and his brows gathered as if in thought, but he said nothing. September. At last, all last night she slept asleep, being always afraid to sleep with something weaker when she woke from it. The professor and I took in turns to watch, and we never left her for a moment unattended. Quincy Morris said nothing about his intentions, but I knew that all night long he patrolled round and round the house. When the day came, its searching light showed the ravages of poor Lucy's strength. She was hardly able to turn her head, and the little nourishment which she could take seemed to do her no good. At times she slept, and both Van Helsing and I noticed a difference in her between sleeping and waking. Whilst asleep, she looked stronger, although more haggard, and her breathing was softer. Her open mouth showed the pale gums drawn back from the teeth, which thus looked positively longer and sharper than usual. When she woke, the softness of her eyes evidently changed the expression, for she looked her own self, although a dying one. In the afternoon, she asked for Arthur and the telegraph order. Quincy went off to meet him at the station. When he arrived, it was nearly 6 o'clock, and the sun was setting full and warm, and the red light streamed in through the window and gave more color to the pale cheeks. When he saw her, Arthur was simply choking with emotion, and none of us could speak. In the hours that had passed, the fits of sleep, or the comatose condition that passed for it, had grown more frequent, so that the pauses in conversation was possible to shorten. Arthur's presence, however, seemed to act as a stimulant. She rallied a little, and spoke to him more brightly than she had done since we arrived. He, too, pulled himself together and spoke as cheerily as he could, so that the best was made of everything. It is now nearly 1 o'clock, and he and Van Helsing are sitting with her. I am to relieve them in a quarter of an hour, and I am entering this on Lucy's phonograph. Until 6 o'clock, they are to try to rest. I fear that tomorrow will end our watching, for the shock has been too great. The poor child cannot rally. God help us all. Letter. Mina Harker to Lucy Westenra. Unopened by her. 17 September. My dearest Lucy, it seems an age since I heard from you, or indeed since I wrote. You will pardon me, I know, for all my faults, when you have read all my budget of news. When I got my husband back all right, well, I got my husband back all right. When we arrived at Exeter, there was a carriage waiting for us, and in it, although he had, with love and pride, seen neither chick nor child, all are gone, and in my will I have left you everything. I cried, Lucy dear, as Jonathan and the old man clasped hands. Our evening was of Mr. Hawkins wants to tell him all about the clients. How is your dear mother getting on? I wish I could run up to town for a day or two to see you, dear, but I dare not go yet, with so much on my shoulders, and Jonathan wants looking after still. He is beginning to put some flesh on his bones again, but he was terribly weakened by the long illness. Even now, he sometimes starts out of his sleep in a sudden way, and awakes all trembling until I can coax him back to his usual placidity. However, thank God, these occasions grow less frequent as the days go on, and they will in time pass away altogether, I trust. And now I've told you my news. Let me ask yours. What are you to be married, and where? And who is to perform the ceremony, and what are you to wear? And is it to be a public or a private wedding? Tell me all about it, dear. Tell me all about everything, for there is nothing which interests you which will not be dear to me. Jonathan asked me to send his respectful duty, but I do not think that is good enough from the junior partner of the important firm Hawkins and Harker. And so, as you love me, and he loves me, and I love you with all the moods and tenses of the verb, I send you simply his love instead. Goodbye, my dearest Lucy, and all blessings on you. Yours, Mina Harker. Report from Patrick Hennessy, MD, MRC SLK, QCPI, etc., etc., to John Stewart, MD, 20 September. My dear sir, in accordance with your wishes, I enclose report of the conditions of everything left in my charge. With regard to patient Renfield, there is more to say. He has had another outbreak, which might have had a dreadful ending, but which, as it fortunately happened, was unattended with any unhappy results. This afternoon, a carrier's cart with 2 men made a call at the empty house whose grounds abet our own. Abet on ours. The house to which, you will remember, the patient twice ran away. The men stopped at our gate to ask the porter their way, as they were strangers. I was myself looking out of the study window, having a smoke after dinner, and saw one of them come up to the house. As he passed the window of Renfield's room, the It was, I am sorry to say, however, only another instance of his cunning. For within half an hour, I heard of him again. This time he had broken out through the window of his room and was running down the avenue. I called to the attendants to follow me and ran after him, for I feared he was intent on some mischief. My fear was justified when I saw the same cart which had passed before coming down the road, having on it some great wooden boxes. The men were wiping their foreheads and were flushed in the face, as if with violent exercise. Before I could get up to him, the patient rushed at them, and pulling one of them off the cart, began to knock his head against the ground. If I had not seized him just at that moment, I believe he would have killed the man there and then. The other fellow jumped down and struck him over the head with the butt end of his heavy whip. It was a terrible blow, but he did not seem to mind it, but seized him also and struggled with the three of us, pulling us to and fro as if we were kittens. You know, I am no lightweight, and the others were both burly men. At first he was silent in his fighting, but as we began to master him and the attendants were putting a straight waistcoat on him, he began to shout, "I'll frustrate them. They shan't rob me. They shan't murder me by inches. I'll fight with my lord and master," and all sorts of similar incoherent ravings. It was with very considerable difficulty that they got him back to the house and put him in the padded room. One of the attendants at the party had a finger broken. However, I said it, and he is going on well. The two carriers were at first loud in their threats of actions for damages, and promised to rain all the penalties of the law on us. Their threats were, however, mingled with some sort of indirect apology to the deceit of the two of them by a feeble madman. They said that if it had not been for the way their strength had been spent in carrying and raising the heavy boxes to the cart, they would have made short work of him. They gave as another reason for their defeat the extraordinary state of drought to which they had been reduced by the dusty nature of their occupation, and the reprehensible distance from the scene of their labor in any place of public entertainment. I quite understood their drift, and after a stiff glass grog, or rather more of the same, and with each a sovereign in hand, they made light of the attack, and swore that they would encounter a worse madman any day for the pleasure of meeting so bloomin' good of look as your correspondent. I took their names and addresses in case they might be needed. They are as follows.
Hang out with friends, or enjoy the festivities. If you're all about that Street Fighter life, the Battle Hub is the place to be. This is your fate. Eternity signing off. See ya! And don't forget to like and sub.
That day after tomorrow, for before Mr. Hawkins left in his will that he was to be buried in the grave with his father. As there are no relations at all, Jonathan will have to be chief mourner. I shall try to run over to see you, dearest, if only for a few minutes. Forgive me for troubling you. With all blessings, your loving, Nina Harder. Dr. Seward's Diary, 20 September. Only resolution and habit can let me make an entry tonight. I am too miserable, too low-spirited, too sick of the world and all in it, including life itself, that I would not care if I heard this moment the flapping of the wings of the angel of death.